Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my topic is China. As we know, President Trump is very much worried by the spectacular rise of China and the competition that it makes to the United States. In fact, his entire program, in one way or another, has to do with China, with his tariffs, with his solutions to reindustrialization of America, and so on and so forth. And Secretary of State Rubio, in his latest speeches, also during the confirmation hearings, talked a lot about China as a major threat. So, the purpose of my discussion today is to analyze and summarize the reasons for this spectacular success in historical perspective, and also comparing somewhat the experience of Russian communist modernization and that of China, and explain some of the weak spots and some of the successes that the Chinese have made. Now, what I relied to, the most important thing right now is to see what exactly is China today. And this is much misunderstood. Americans still think that American economy is much stronger, that China is catching up, that it's still far behind, that its GDP is like about a third less than the United States, all these things. So what I'd like to do is to quote you some of the materials from the UN's review. This is the a publication I read regularly. It's an alternative media, UNZ, UNZ. And Ron Unz is the editor, and he has a series there that's called American Pravda. And one of those articles is the comparison of China and the United States. And it has enormous data on virtually any kind of economic indicator. And he relies in this article, and I'll give you a description of in the description, a link to it, on a Chinese author and other sources. So what I'd like to do is to give you an idea as to how far exactly is the difference. Well, first of all, let's do the deficit. The trade deficit of the United States with China has been decreasing, but still, 2024 it stood at 131. I rounded up at $131 billion. In 2023, it was at $279 billion. When Trump was president during his first term, 418 billion a year. Now, these figures suggest that within 4 years, the United States deficit in trade with China was about $1 trillion. Now, let's look at some of the data which shows the magnitude of Chinese economic success. And all of this data, as I told you, is from the article in the UN's review. We start with robotics. China has the world's highest adoption of robotics. 50% of all robots sold in the world is in China. Manufacturing. Manufacturing is 38% of the Chinese GDP, and 55% comes from services. In the United States, its manufacturing is 11% of GDP, and 88% comes from the services. Construction. China pours the same amount of concrete in 3 years as the United States did in the last century. In other words, it's enormous, absolutely incredible rates of building and construction. Now, China imported 128 billion worth of iron ore in 2022, and the United States imported 1 billion, 128 versus 1. China produced 1.3 billion tons of steel in 2022 versus 97 million tons by the US in the same year, which is, of course, I think it's about 13 times more. China built 45 100,000 kilometers of high-speed rail in the past 10 years, and the United States built none, zero. Um, Now, Times of London published a chart showing the actual trajectory of China's auto exports compared with that of other countries, and the former had roughly reached a level 6 times greater than that in the United States. Coal mining is one of the world's largest industries, and China's production is more than 5 times greater than the United States. Chinese steel, as I have already mentioned, is 13 times greater. Chinese farmers grow 3 times more wheat than the United States. According to Pentagon estimates, China's current shipbuilding capacity is a staggering 239 times greater than that in the United States. If we consult the aggregate economic statistics provided by the CIA World Factbook and other organizations, we find that the total size of China's real productive economy is already more than 3 times larger than that of the United States. So this is the reality, and this is the statistics. Now, the question, of course, is how did China get to this? This is what is called an economic miracle. And I start with the historical explanation and historical view at this. Now, obviously, the key here is the Chinese communist development, because in 20th century there was a Chinese revolution, and before that, 19th century was a century of humiliation. Now, what's important about the century of humiliation, the way the Chinese perceive it, is that China was weak. China was divided between the great powers, colonial powers. It was divided into spheres of influence and economic development, such as between Britain, most importantly, then Japan, France, etc., Russia. And this humiliation was something that is very much a part of today's psyche of the Chinese. The result of it was a desire to modernize. But by what they meant by the word modernize is not westernize. Modernize means becoming strong without abandoning their own traditions and institutions. The imperial regime collapsed in the revolution of 1912, so much very similar to like it was in Turkey and in other Asian countries, because it was incapable of modernization. It was very stable, it was very traditional, but it was unable to incorporate modernization in terms of technology. What's also interesting about the mentality of the Chinese at that time is when the British wrote a letter to the Chinese emperor proposing trade and all kinds of exchanges and things, the Chinese emperor answered that there's absolutely nothing that we can learn from the West. Now that shows that the Chinese valued not technology, but they valued wisdom. This is so much a part of Confucius philosophy, the kind of a cult of wisdom, and the idea that anything of value that could have been said, was already discovered, not in terms of technology, but in terms of wisdom, in terms of the way you live, in terms of the development of a personality and of the society. So China embarked on this dramatic journey, which took half a century. It is only in 1949 that the Communist Party came to power after a long struggle, the long march, and the mythology of the struggle that lasted with the Chiang Kai-shek regime, which is the Kuomintang, as it is known, which is now their followers, their continuation is in Taiwan. Anyway, what's important is that the Chinese communism is not like Russian communism. It's not actually communism at all, if you want to put it. The people mean different things when they say the word communism. The way I define the Chinese communism is it's a method of modernization. They embrace this idea of communism or a Bolshevik kind of an interpretation as a method of quickly bring economic progress. This is what they thought they were doing. Now, this is very, very different from Russia, because in Russia, the communists come to power with the idea of destruction of the hated Tsarist order. The Chinese don't want to destruct anything. They're not destroyers, they're producers. They want to build better than it was possible under the old regime. Also, the Chinese Mao movement is not a working class movement, it's a peasant movement. So there's no hostility with the peasants as it was with the Bolsheviks, with catastrophic results when they did this collectivization. So Mao's regime is a really populist regime. In a sense, it's based on the people, on the peasants, with the idea of bringing them out of poverty and creating a strong China that can resist Western aggression and imperialism and colonialism. That is the essence of Maoism. Now, when Mao became the kind of a popular leader in the 1950s and 60s, the reason he was so popular in the rest of the world was because he was a kind of a banner in the anti-imperialist struggle. And with the idea, like Trotsky, with permanent revolution, there should be always innovation, always new cadres, always new opportunities for the young. This is what Mao was in the 1950s. Now, in terms of the economic model, what Mao has chosen is to follow the Soviet model, which was attractive as it looked like fast industrialization. So the idea was bring collective farms. He thought there was nothing wrong with those. And indeed, in China, they were not collective farms in a sense like they were in Russia, because in Russia, they were nothing but serfdom. They were a mechanism of extracting value from the peasants. In China, they were mechanisms to unite them and produce more and get out of poverty. Like a different thing, even though it sounded like it was the same. Now, the economic model was building factories, the state industrialization, which worked for a while, and it was effective at a certain level when the gross production of iron ore and steel and factories and all that stuff was at the core, and it was important. Now, what's also extremely important is that, as we all know, Maoist regime was still in poverty. It did not achieve spectacular. It was pretty much a successful construction, but there was a kind of a dead end. And especially during the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, when they were abusing professors and all the bourgeois elements, and they were just going overboard with destruction of the old order and old traditions and so forth. Now, during this time, there was this party struggle in between, and it was very similar like in the Soviet Union, except in the Soviet Union, those that were proponents of the Kosygin reforms, economic reforms and market reforms, they lost. And the kind of a die-hard communists, meaning conservative Stalinists, came to power and continued until the collapse of the Soviet Union. In China, those who were in favor of economic reforms and market reforms got the upper hand, and this is Deng Xiaoping. Now, when I studied his biography, what's so interesting is that Deng Xiaoping studied in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, and he loved it. He had very, very good impressions of life in Moscow in 1924. He was a young man, and it was the period. New economic policy means capitalism under Communist Party rule. It was free private enterprise. It was spectacularly effective in Russia when peasants restored Russian agriculture in a small 3 years. They brought it back to the 1913 level. By the way, I have a huge book about it that I wrote, which is called Russia After Lenin, and it will be in the description. In any case, Deng Xiaoping thought this is a great formula, which is Communist Party rule as an organizing force and private enterprise. And of course, his famous expression is, it doesn't matter what is the color of the cat as long as it catches mice. So this is the point of departure in 1978. Now, Americans usually look at the Chinese modernization and the construction is that they invested their companies' capital over there and know-how, and that produced such results. It is only partly true. The most important thing, of course, is the Chinese model is not just private enterprise and open for all. No, it is the guiding hand of the state, of the Communist Party. Moreover, and here's my idea, I think that Chinese Communist Party should not be understood as a communist party, as it is mistakenly in the United States. Chinese Communist Party is exactly like the imperial administration in China. The political China of the Chinese is still very much intact, and that's the emperor and that's the administration, and the administration is based on merit and the promotion and the competition of the cadres, and this is exactly the mechanism, if you study it attentively, within the Communist Party, very similar, but more effective and more efficient than they were under the imperial regime. So, also, what is to explain such incredible success is that it is a merit-based system. And that means that the promotion goes on the basis of education, which is free and has been for decades. China produces more engineers, as Musk said, than the United States. Also, is Confucius and his very important sort of principles that are at the core of Chinese civilization, which is that they are based on morality, respect for the elderly, tremendous respect for the elderly, and the government's job is to provide for all society as if it is one family. And that is exactly what the Chinese political culture is about, is what one family, and everybody has to prosper. On top of that, it is moral value, respect for tradition, the cult of the elderly and the family, the cult of knowledge and wisdom, obedience, hard work, endurance, and patriotism. These are the qualities that stay at the core of the success of the Chinese. But most importantly, it's this fundamental difference to the United States. The Americans value individualism. The Chinese value collectivism. The Americans value individual initiative and private enterprise, private. No, in China, it is the guiding hand of the state. It is the organizing imperial administration that is organizing the success of branches and supports new branches of industry and promotes them. And this is something that is unique, and in many ways, it is something that is extremely successful. And finally, the last word, the Russian communists failed and they were overthrown and the regime collapsed because they were absolutely stuck in their Stalinist ways. The Chinese experiment has shown what one could do when one respects one's own heritage and at the same time launches modernization in terms of technological advancement. Thank you very much. And this is all for today. I hope you will subscribe and write your comments. Until next time.